Hello, welcome to the Liberated Multitasker. Today I'm going to be processing and preserving some corn. I'm also in the back getting ready to water bath some tomato sauce. Now while my tomato sauce is cooking down on the stove and getting thicker, I'm going to go ahead and start cutting and shucking this corn. So this is my field corn. We had about 6 rows and it looks great. However, the raccoons got into the corn, and so we did not get a lot. I have a 5-gallon bucket full of corn to deal with this morning. Now, when I was growing up, we'd have a truckload of corn to deal with, and we had an assembly line going. My daddy would pull it, my 2 older brothers would cut the ends and shuck it, and us little kids would silk it, and my mom would cut and scrape it. And we did all of this in the back of a pickup truck. Getting your corn ready to preserve is quite a messy process, so that's why mostly we did it all in the back of a truck. Now I just wanted to let you know what I did to get my tomato sauce ready. All I did was core and peel the tomatoes and throw them in this Nesco or a crock pot. I've used both, and let them cook and stew overnight. And then the next day I'll put them in a pot on the stove in order to cook them down so it's thicker. And it's really as simple as that. And this is what they look like before I cut my slow cooker on. As you can see, they're not even chopped up. Here I'm just stirring the sauce, checking on the thickness, and trying to decide how much longer it needs to cook down. Now back to cutting the corn. Now let me show you how I shuck my corn. I'll take my thumb and I'll grab it at the top. But I'm not just grabbing the shucks, I'm also grabbing as many silks as I can. And when I do it this way, it makes silking the corn so much faster and easier. Now if you've been doing this the whole time, this is nothing new to you. But if you're new to processing corn, it's a good little tip to have. Now something we've also done in the past is when we've cut and shucked our corn, instead of using a butter knife to silk it, my husband has used the air compressor to blow the silks out from in between the rows of the corn, and that's worked great as well. Now to show you my gadget that I love for cutting and scraping corn. It's a Pampered shelf cutter and scraper, and I'll link it in the description notes below. And it does make this process so much easier. It's also fairly inexpensive as well. Now this process can be boring to watch, so in just a minute we're going to go ahead and skip ahead because this is pretty monotonous. So next we're going to go over to the spaghetti sauce. What I like to do once it's kind of cooked down to the thickness I want, I go ahead and just use my Emersion blender just to get any maybe larger chunks. I could put it in a blender, but I like my tomato sauce just a little chunky. So the Emersion blender for me works just fine. Now I'm just going to get my hot jars out of my water bath canner and get ready to jar up my sauce. I'm going to start by adding a 1/4 teaspoon of citric acid. And I'm going to use my ladle to fill up my pint jars. This ladle really comes in handy during canning season. One last jar to go. I have just enough to get that 7th pint jar. I'm going to debubble. And then once that is done, I'm going to check for headspace. You want 1/2 inch of headspace when you're canning sauce. I'm going to use 1/2 teaspoon of salt in each jar. You can use canning salt or Redmond's real salt. You do not want to use regular table salt. Now I'm just going to take some water on a paper towel and wipe the rims of each jar so they're nice and clean. Now it's time for the lids and bands. Usually when I'm keeping my jars hot, I throw my lids in the pot as well. So I'm just fishing those out. placing them on my jars, and then I'll get my bands, and you know this part, fingertip tight. Then I'm going to put them back in my hot water, and then once they come to a boil, I'll process them for 35 minutes for pints. This water bath canner will hold 7 pints. Now, back to the corn. I've set my timer for the tomato sauce to make sure I process it for the correct length of time. Anytime you're canning, check with your ball canning book to make sure you're using the right recipe and using the right processing times for what you're doing. Now for more cutting and scraping. I'd planned on doing much more corn than this. I had wanted a laundry basket full, which is about 3 5-gallon buckets, but it just didn't work out. And my plan also was to pressure can some cut corn. So when I realized I wasn't going to have enough for that, I decided to cut and scrape it and get it ready to freeze. Now it's time to cut my canner off. I'm just going to take the lid off and let that cool off just a bit before I pull my jars out. Now I've added some olive oil to my pan, and I've added all my cut corn. I'm going to add some salt and pepper and a touch of water. I'm going to cook this in the pan for about 3 to 5 minutes. Just stirring it around and letting it cook just a bit. Now it's time to pull my jars out of the canner. I'm going to place them on a dish towel. And we'll let them sit on this towel for about 24 hours. I will check later to make sure they all seal. So the 7 beautiful pints of tomato sauce. I've decided I needed to add just a little bit of water. You want to make sure it doesn't stick. Stirring it around really good. Now to get ready to cool it off. I'm using my 13-quart mixing bowl, added ice, and I have a glass bowl that I'm going to put the corn in. I want it to stop cooking, and so I'm going to stir this around in the bowl and let it have plenty of time to cool completely before I bag it. I go back time and again and stir it just to help it cool off. Now normally, since we're a family of 2, at this point I like to put about 2 cups of corn per bag. But I don't have enough for 3 bags, so I end up putting about 2.5 cups per bag. So it doesn't sound like a lot, but my 5-gallon bucket of corn yielded me 5 cups of cut corn. I did have to throw away 2 ears because they were too hard, but the chickens really enjoyed those. Now I'm just going to get all the air out as much as I can, seal them up, and flatten them out. I've already labeled my bags, and now they are ready to go in the freezer. So I got 2 bags of field corn and 7 pints of tomato sauce. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Please like, share, and subscribe, and I hope to see you soon.